Today we're going to talk about the Steelsring Nikon F mount to Fujifilm GFX autofocus adapter. Welcome back to the channel, guys. It has been a while. Life got the better of me, but I'm back now and hopefully I'll be able to continue producing a few videos. So thanks for your patience and let's get started. So as a former Nikon abuser, I had a few lenses that when I moved to the Fujifilm system I really missed. The 58mm f1.4G is one of those. The 85mm f1.4G, there's some really spectacular Nikon lenses there, and so I wanted to maybe see how they would work on the GFX. I mean, using something like, we're filming on the X-T4 right now, using it on something like that is maybe not going to get the full benefit from those lenses, but on the GFX, as long as you can cover most of the sensor or use it in 35mm mode, then there's still the ability to get the most from those lenses. So I decided to invest in a couple of adapters last year, and I think I used a Zhongyi one, and I used a, let me see if I can see it up there. No, anyhow, so one of the other adapters that was out there. But the one thing that I missed and that I had a lot of trouble with was focus. Focusing at f1.4 on the GFX is not that easy to do when you're doing manual focus. So I really missed having the ability to autofocus those lenses, even if it was just to get them close and then be able to fine-tune it a little bit. So I went looking and I found that Steelsring had a ring in development, had an adapter in development, and that it would be coming soon. And so I checked back frequently, and then when it finally came out, it's not the cheapest adapter, but I did just sort of take the risk and decide to give this a go. So I wanted to talk you through a little bit about my experience with that today. As I said, this gives you the ability to autofocus with Nikon lenses, and specifically Nikon G or E type lenses, because those are the only ones with the focus motor built into the lens. So with Nikon's F mount, they included backwards compatibility for basically every lens that they've ever made, and so that included things like manual focus and also screw-driven focus motors and things like that. But of course this doesn't have Nikon's focus motor inside of it, so you're dealing with just basically electronic control of an existing motor. So you'll not be using sort of the old D-type lenses or anything like that. You'll have to use the more modern ones with the focus motor inside. Whatever Nikon calls that focus motor, it's similar to the ones that Fuji use. It just electronically moves the elements around. So having said that, let's dig into the actual adapter itself. Now, the build quality is what you might expect from something this expensive. I think it was $549, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll check that in a bit. But it feels like it was machined well. The only couple of caveats to that maybe are the fact that as you mount it to the GFX body, it doesn't feel quite as smooth, and I'll put a video up on the screen for you in a bit. It doesn't feel quite as smooth or sound quite as smooth as mounting something like one of the native GF lenses, or the Laowa 17mm for that matter. On the other side though, the Nikon mount does feel just like a Nikon mount, so it's a little bit disappointing that would be the case on something that costs this much, but otherwise it functions perfectly, and it doesn't seem like it's going to cause any damage to the mount. It's not sort of a really stiff turn or anything like that. So let's quickly take a look at the mounting and unmounting process, and you can hear the sounds for yourself. So the next thing that you do get with this is the ability to control the aperture. Now you have an aperture ring here for G-type lenses, and you can set it to auto for E-type lenses. Now I haven't been able to test that, but Steelsrings do say that you can control the aperture from the GFX body with an E-type lens because they have the magnetically controlled aperture inside. The G-type lenses, on the other hand, actually have the standard aperture inside that relies on Nikon's aperture indexing system. So the body would move a pin into place, and then as the aperture closes down, it hits that pin and stops. So that's what this is relying on as well, and honestly I feel like it could have been a little bit better implemented. The lens is able to communicate with the body what its widest aperture is, but as you stop down, it's unable to know how far it's stopped down. So I think that's a limitation of this this ring communicating through the adapter itself. I feel like that at this price point should have been something that was included, but alas, it's not. So in terms of actual autofocus speed, I was quite surprised. I mean, honestly, I wasn't expecting very much. You're driving what is basically somebody else's lens through a system that's interpreting what somebody else's camera wants to be able to do. So I wasn't really expecting much, but I was quite surprised. It really does depend on the amount of glass being moved and how fast the focus motors are in the Nikon lens. It doesn't actually seem to be a limitation of the ring itself, the Steelsring's adapter. That seems to be transmitting things pretty quickly. So for example, the 20mm f1.8 focuses a lot faster than the 58mm 1.4, for example, which is also true on Nikon bodies. So you're also going to see the wobbling of the contrast detect system. That's just part and parcel of using Fujifilm's contrast detect system. Unfortunately, the adapter itself does not support the GFX 100's phase detect system. I'm not sure if it's possible to implement that in the future. I'm not sure whether even that communication is possible, but for the moment it's still contrast detect, so it doesn't matter whether you're using the 50R, the 50S or the 100, you're still going to get the same autofocus speed going back and forth with that same contrast detect wobble. Having said that, you don't really expect much from autofocus in these systems. It's not going to be an X-T4, it's not going to be a Sony A7, whatever the current one is. It's not going to be that fast on a system like this. So you're not looking to track sports and things with adapted lenses on the GFX system at this point. Who knows what's going to happen. So you are going to see a marked difference between the overall autofocus speed of different lenses when using this adapter, but I think the amount of wobble from the contrast detect system and sort of the amount of hit to miss ratio, the accuracy of it is about the same no matter which lens that you use, that I have used so far anyway. That's been my experience. So generally speaking, I mean, would I recommend it? Well, I think it really depends on your use case. If you're expecting sort of Nikon level focus speeds, you're not going to get it simply because the cameras aren't capable of it, or the autofocus system isn't capable of it. But if you're willing to accept the fact that this is going to be the same speed as you would get from your native GFX lenses, perhaps a little slower, then it might be a good investment. If you're having trouble like I am with manual focusing at really wide apertures on the GFX system, then it's also a good option. It's also quite expensive, and it means that you're using non-native lenses that were designed for a smaller sensor. So you're going to end up with some vignetting as to how much that really bothers you, or whether you're going to use the 35mm crop mode to remove it. That's going to be an entirely a personal decision, but for me, I think that using these, for example, this 20mm f1.8, the corners do get a bit dark, and I'll show you an example of that. But for the most part, you're losing 10% of the frame if you crop in, and then the rest of it can sort of be corrected with vignette correction. So I don't find it to be too much of an issue. With the 58mm and the 85mm, I found that they mostly covered the frame. We didn't get to see really blackened out corners. They were a bit darker than they would be on a full frame sensor, of course, because it's a bit bigger, but they weren't completely blacked out like they were with this lens. So you can still use the full GFX sensor for those lenses. Also, these lenses weren't designed to resolve across such a large sensor, so the sharpness isn't quite as high on the GFX as it would be on the Nikon cameras when you're wide open. As you start to stop down, they get pretty similar to what you would expect these lenses to perform at. So f2.8, f4, they're absolutely fantastic, but wide open, f1.4, f1.8, you're going to see a little softness. So I mean, as to whether that really bothers you as well, I mean, are you going for the absolute sharpness, well, then you might as well be using GF lenses, Fuji's native lenses. If you're going for that sort of the feeling that comes from using a lens that was designed for a smaller sensor, or if you want some of the characteristic Nikon bokeh that you can get from the 58mm or the 85mm, then this might be a good investment. So taking those three things into consideration, basically the sharpness, the vignetting, and whether you really need the autofocus, could help you decide whether you need this. If you don't need the autofocus, you might actually want to go for one of the much cheaper rings that simply adapts the lenses to the body, and you can go ahead and manual focus those. Finally, I've done a more detailed look at this over on fstoppers.com with some more sample images and a few more explanations of exactly what I'm talking about here, so I'll put that link below for you. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I hope to see you next time.